one. Tendai, great to see you. We're going to be talking a little bit about where you are and what you're doing now, a little bit later on in our service. But to start our conversation this morning, I want to ask you a little bit about your background growing up. You grew up in Zimbabwe. For those who don't know the history, Rhodesia, as it was part of the British Empire, a colony that was formed. Cecil Rhodes had a lot to do with that, and it was named after him. And then eventually, through some difficult political times, 1980, Zimbabwe came into being as an independent country from Britain. And you grew up in that. So tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Zimbabwe, and what your experience was growing up there, and what your experience was of the minority whites that you met during your time as a kid growing up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your service today. I remember I guess, the Civil War taking place when I was very much a young child. And when my parents divorced, my sibling and I were sent to live with my grandparents in the rural areas. And this was in the early 70s. And during that time, because of the way that the country was divided, there was segregation. So we never really came into contact with white people. The only remembrance of white people was really when we had soldiers that would go into the villages and raid the villages, because there was always a suspicion that the villagers were feeding what the Rhodesian Front called terrorists. But as far as villagers were concerned, they saw these simply as freedom fighters, people that were fighting for equal opportunities for Black people. So I remember one time we had to flee from the rural areas with my grandparents because the soldiers came, they raided the villages, they were torching the huts. I mean, as a young person, you don't really fully understand what is going on, but they were burning these huts and we had to flee, getting onto buses. And so it was a difficult time, and this place of safety seems to be in the towns and the cities. So we moved back into staying with my dad. By this time he remarried, and so so we continued to live in our own Black communities because of the segregation. So as a young person, really, the only remembrance, the only vivid picture that I have of white people would have been simply seeing police as well as soldiers. That would have been my only sort of like a visual image of white people, because we lived in mainly Black areas and went to schools, in Black areas as well. So at that point, the whole concept about inequality as a young person, I didn't fully understand, because all I saw was just Black people around me, living with Black people, interacting with them, and this seemed to have carried on until independence, when Zimbabwe became independent in 1980. It was that point, because by this time my dad had quite excelled in his profession as a banker, and he had a lot of Black families now moving into white areas, white suburbs. And because, and so that meant that we were now moving in to go to schooling in white schools. And so this was really the beginning of interacting and mixing with white people. And it was that point that we began to encounter racism, because the way that we were treated in schools, the way that they would nickname us Kefas, that was the language that they often used. You're a Kefa, get away from here, Kefa, or come here, Kefa. And as a young person, being in this new environment, didn't quite really understand what was going on, but you felt as if, you were not wanted in these schools. and sometimes there was a bit of bullying that would go on. Although the government would make an effort of communicating that we will not allow racism, we will not tolerate segregation of any form, because this is now a new country. And so that was really my experience initially of experiencing and facing racism. Was the idea of being looked down upon and being called names, being referred to as monkeys. And sometimes they will just make the funny sounds of a monkey and laugh as other boys are walking away. And the unfortunate thing about it is that we never really talked about it when we got home. It was something that you just kept yourself, because you just thought, well, I don't understand what this whole thing is about. And the only time that you had a conversation about about segregation was amongst your own peers, your own Black peers. That was really the only platform that you had where you could relate your feelings and how you felt. And so often what you shared with the other Black students, it was the same experience that they were experiencing as well. So that was my initial coming face to face with segregation, racism, with a picture being conveyed that you are different from us. Your opinion are not as valid as our opinions are. I guess it created something within me in a way. At that point, I started thinking about the picture of the hearts in the villages being tortured by white soldiers, and I guess at that point I became quite angry and bitter and hated white people. And it got to a point whereby sometimes I would get involved in fights with white people, white students, simply because I kind of felt that why are we being hated? Why are we being treated differently? And so at that point, I guess from my experience in high school, was, by the way, I went to the same high school as Bruce Grobler. You may know Bruce Grobler. He used to play for Liverpool. You went to the same school as I did. So I guess for me, the whole thing about racism and about segregation, it became a platform that I began to use as a way of saying, well, if I don't want to have anything to do with white people, you must hate them because they hate you. You must ill-treat them because if they've ill-treated you. So that's I guess my early years of experiencing racism.
Having experienced that, of living in an apartheid society, in living in a segregated society, and then even sort of post-independence with a sort of a strap line, if you like, from above, from government, of saying this is a new nation and a new start, still the old attitudes being seen and experienced. Where for you did faith come into the whole picture of what was happening, and where was your journey with God in all of this and this time?
At that point, I could crystal say I was not a Christian. And I remember there were some young people that would come and share their faith with me. Then I would just jeer and laugh with me. So, I don't believe in these things. You're trying to bring a white God to me. So I just sort of like rebuffed the whole thing about faith, until it came to a point where one of my teachers invited me to his church. Now, in Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe, there was always a clear respect for your elders, and teachers were very much part and parcel of the fabric that were almost like revered. So when a teacher said something, even though you may not agree with it, you will just simply do it simply because, disagreeing with the teacher was perceived as if you were disrespecting the teacher. So when this teacher then invited me to his church, my initial thought was, oh, but he's trying to invite me to this Christian business, to this white God, this white Jesus. I'm more interested, but because he asked me to come, I just simply agreed, just as a way of almost like, because I knew that I would see this teacher every day in school. So so I just agreed to go along. So I started attending his church. It was a Pentecostal church, and as I'm attending this church, uh, folks were singing, and I could not fully understand what they were singing about. I could tell that they were singing to something, because each time they would raise their hands up, they would look up. I would look, and I would look at them, try and figure out, who on earth are they singing to? So that went on for a while. This was in a Pentecostal church, so every Sunday I would go. But I kept on saying to myself, well, this is not for me, because what would happen is that after the singing, the minister would then get up and he would start preaching, and at that point I would go to sleep. So this was my pattern. I would observe what they're doing, they're singing, and I would enjoy the dancing because it's a Pentecostal church. And then when the minister came forward to as soon as he stood up, it was my key, I guess, to simply say, well, you can take a snooze. So this went on for a number of weeks. Then I just felt that this wasn't for me, but my fear was I can't just stop going, because the teacher would ask me at school why I wasn't in church, So I thought, well, I need to come up with a good lie. And when I decided that I had worked out my lie at that point, then I said, well, this Sunday is going to be my last Sunday. After this, I'm never going to go back there, because that's not for me. It's a white Jesus. And so I'd worked out my lie, and then that Sunday, went through the same thing. The preacher got up, and then this time he said, today I want to talk to you about love. I guess at that point I was hooked. I sort of like remembered what I said to myself, let's talk about love. What do you know about love? Now you must understand that I've always felt unloved at home because my parents are divorced. I've always blamed myself for the divorce. My stepmom didn't think well of us, so so in the home, always felt unloved. Now, so I'm saying to myself, to the minister, what do you know about love? So the moment he began to talk about God's love and how God loves me, and it felt as if God was now speaking face to face. I felt as if the crowds of people that were gathered in that church had almost like disappeared, and it was as if there was this divine being speaking to me about how he loved me. Jesus simply revealing himself to me, and the message about I love you, I've sent my son to die for your sins, and I've come so that you may have a better life. And I was just really just drawn in to that message. I can't remember the rest of the message, but all I remember was that when the minister made an altar call, I just found myself at the front of the church, and that Sunday I surrendered my life to Jesus, and that was a beginning of a new life, new experiences. I mean, I still had problems with the whole thing to do with racism, but I no longer saw Jesus as a white Jesus. I no longer saw God as one who condoned injustice. My faith from that point on, I just began to grow. I was given, in Africa, when you become a Christian, you're given a Bible, and then you're told you need to share your faith with someone else. You need to read the Bible on a regular basis, and you need to pray. So those are the three things: your relationship with God through prayer, through the Word, and sharing your faith with someone else. And so I began to do that. And yes, things were so nasty at home. I remember attending a youth club, and each time, you always remember that each time I had to go back home, I would have to, because we used to have a double-story house with an attic on top. So we used to leave, our bedroom was upstairs. We used to leave our room, our window just slightly open so that we could climb over the roof and then climb into our bedroom. When I say we, I'm referring to my brother and I, my young brother, because we used to do this thing together. And so, but my stepmom caught on to it, and then one day she decided to lock that window. And so we slept outside. And I remember saying to my brother, I'm not going back to youth again. Because, he was just so cold, sleeping outside, but when Friday came again, it was time for youth. You were just so excited to go back to youth. You forgot about your sleeping outside. And, that's really how faith began to have an impact upon my own life. And then God began to speak to me about my own injustice, my own attitude towards white people, how I needed to have a different approach, an attitude, a different attitude, how I need to shift. Because God said, well, they are my people. I love them as much as I love you. You need to love them. If you are to walk and their fellowship with me, because God began to speak to me in a very clear way, particularly in the book of 1 John, when God says, no, how can you say you love me, whom you have not seen with your own eyes, but you hate your own brother, whom you see? And at that point, I just felt the need to repent, because I felt that was rebelliousness of me hating another human being, of me hating white people. And God brought about a healing upon my own life, and then God began to challenge me about my attitude towards my stepmom, because we used to hate her, even though we lived with her, but we always wished her harm. And then God said, that's not acceptable. So God shifted my attitude towards her. I began to see the need to love her. And at that point, I began to have good white friends, where some of my best friends, are white people, and relationships around me began to have a different meaning, even though there was racism, there was injustice around me. But I guess I began to look at things from God's point of view rather than my own. So faith began to impact the way that I saw the world, the way that I saw other people. There would be conversations in school about racism or how another white person would ill-treat a black person. I'll step in there and say, well, but this is not right. You can't treat another fellow human being this way because God does not approve. No. So I almost literally would use the fact that God will not approve of that. So therefore, why are you doing it? So, and so faith became much more dominant in my life as a teenager at this point. I remember my dad saying to me, you're putting, because for him, he just used to see church. That's all he used to think about. Church seems to be more important to you, that everything else is not important. But I began to see that as, the enemy using my dad to say negative things, and I'll begin to pray for my father. I'll begin to pray for my family that they too would come to faith. But the person who was a key, I guess, someone that I sort of like looked up to was my grandfather. Because I remember in the rural areas, I always used to see him reading the Bible. But at the time, as a young person, you were running around doing your own thing. But you seemed to be quite disciplined, and you spent time reading the Word, praying. But then, I didn't think in terms of, but he's praying to a white God, or he's praying to, that's not how I saw. I just saw someone who was devout in what he believed in, and he took seriously what he believed in. It was really, as I was reflecting upon my own faith, that suddenly I remembered him reading the Word, him taking his faith seriously. And so he had an impact in my own life. And so I had a minister who, when we used to get locked away, not locked away, but when my stepmom used to lock the windows and we had to sleep outside. And so I shared with my pastor, my youth pastor, a white pastor. He's a pastor, he's pastoring here in Scotland at the moment. And he discipled us. And there was also another pastor, because by this time when we moved into a new area. And I began to go through the yellow pages trying to find church. I need to find the church to go to, because the church where I was going to was now far away because we had moved into another suburb. And so I remember going through and thought, but what church am I going to look for? Then I just remember my granddad used to go to a Baptist church. And I thought, let me look for a Baptist church. And it just so happened that there was one just around the corner from where we lived. And I started attending that church, and this pastor just took me under his wings, and he just discipled me. And that pastor today, he lives in Southend-on-Sea. So the key people that played a key role in my own formative years of being a young Christian, they're both here, and we have a good relationship with each other. One of them is still my mentor today. And so faith, I can say that faith actually shifted my outlook to life. God began to speak to me as a teenager about, I'm calling you to the nations. And at this point, I had no picture of the nations. I couldn't understand, Lord, what do you mean the nations? But I knew God was calling me somewhere. And so in a nutshell, that's how my early years were as a young Christian.
It's a fascinating story, and there's lots more we could pick into that. But we're gonna take a break in a moment. But just very quickly, I know we're jumping a little bit in the story, but not much. You had an opportunity to come for a short period and to come to the UK and to work in the UK alongside another church just for a short period of time. Just tell us very quickly a little bit about that experience of coming to the UK and how you felt about that, about coming here, coming into a place that was a white majority place, but also the place that your homeland had become independent from, and coming into that church environment. Tell us a little bit about that short trip you had for those few months where you worked in South Wales.
The first experience was in '93. There used to be a minister who used to come to Zimbabwe from Wales, and he used to work with our church, our local church. So they used to organize these rallies, and I just used to tag along, and then we began to talk, because obviously I used to spend a lot of time around my pastor's home, and so you'll be hosting this minister from Wales, and then this minister then said to me, you seem to be quite a fascinating young person. You seem to love Jesus. I said, well, I do. I love Jesus with every fiber in me, and I'm just seeking to serve him. By this time, I was working for a software company as a software developer. It was predominantly a white company. And so even there in that environment, racism was always prevalent. It was something that you experience on a daily basis through some remark that I say, through things that, sometimes I remember there was a job we needed to do for Dunlop. They were setting up their computer system. And so I was sent, and this lady who was a financial director of the company, she was mortified, and she began to say, well, why are you sending this person? What basically, by what she said, I assume she was simply saying, well, you're sending me a black person. What do they know about IT stuff? So all of these things were around you, but because faith was paramount to me, and the way how God had challenged my own views about white people, it began to shift me, how I look at people. And so often I'll hear such remarks. I would always just to say, well, it's the enemy getting at me, trying to discourage me as a faith. So I would literally rebuke, obviously not the lady, but rebuke the enemy, in my, as I'm praying, in silence. I'll just simply say, I rebuke that spirit in the name of Jesus, And so often that was something that a lot of Christians would do whenever there was injustice. They would simply say, I rebuke that in the name of Jesus. So this minister, we began to have a rapport and started talking about. Then he said to me, we are looking for a young person to come and do a placement with us. We are looking at South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. But we just need one young person. And so I said to the minister, well, what's this person going to be doing? He said, well, the idea is that we want to mentor this person, send them into school, and hope through interaction about him sharing about his experiences about life in Africa, that there will be an opportunity for him to share faith within that context. I said, oh, okay, that's fine. Then he says, well, why don't you apply? Why don't you consider applying? I said, oh, okay, I'll pray about it, and I mean, I didn't think much of it, so eventually I got a response. By then he was back in the UK. Then I got some months later followed, and then he said, well, you have been nominated, you've been successful, so we are asking you to come and join us for 6 months. So to cut the whole story short, God just provided the funding involved, and he met all my needs. So I was able to travel to the UK. I used to live in Cardiff, and part and parcel of what we did is that I would go to school, share about Zimbabwe, my experience of growing up in Africa, and always there was always I guess you would always want to see an opportunity whereby a young person initiated a conversation about faith rather than you presenting faith. So I remember this one school in Wales, South Wales. We had gone there, I'd spoken about to these sixth form students about life in Africa. And then one of them said, Tendai, it doesn't make any sense why you would come all the way from Africa to come talk to us about Africa. Why are you really here? Boom, that was an opportunity really for me to share my faith. So I began to share faith about how I came to faith, about Jesus. And what struck me was, as I'm talking about, as I shared about Jesus, I said, well, I'm here to talk about Jesus, and their reaction by, looking at their facial gesture, it felt like as if they had no clue what I was talking about. And then the Lord, I kind of felt the Lord prompting into my spirit, Tendai, they don't really know who I am. Tell them about me. So I began to share about Jesus, why he came and how he died and why he was dying, why he died on that cross. And as I'm sharing this, because when I was talking about Africa, they were messing around. But this time I'm talking about Jesus, suddenly the room is dead silence. And you could literally hear a pin drop as they are paying attention to what I'm saying. And then as I talk about the death of Christ, this blonde girl, to this day, I remember this picture of a blonde girl with tears running down. And then the young man said, you mentioned about being born again. How can I be born again? At this point, the minister I'd gone into that school with was feeling more and more uncomfortable that he was signaling, because obviously he was behind the students. They couldn't really see his gesture. And so he was simply, and I could lip read what he was saying, stop, you've gone too far, stop. So I said to the young people, I say, well, our time has run out, but if you want to know more about what I've shared today, just go to any church and they will explain further and about how you can give your life to Jesus. So we left that class and we on our way in the car park, and then the gentleman just told me off. You can't do this. Not allowed to do this in this country. You can't preach. So I said, listen, I was simply responding to their questions. They asked the question and I was simply responding to that. No, you can't do that. This is not Africa. So we left it at that. But, although that's what the minister said to me, but, I was just so encouraged in my spirit by that experience of those young people that were so eager to know about Jesus. And then I began to think about, how God has spoken to me about how he was going to call me to the nations. And so then I began to say, Lord, is this the nations? And so, but then I couldn't make sense of each time we'll go to different churches on a Sunday, the churches will be predominantly elderly people, but church buildings empty. I just couldn't understand, because when time came, when I was preparing to come to Wales, I'd never heard of Wales before, so I began to look for material about Wales. And so I came across some material about the Welsh revival. So I said, wow, I was so eager to go to Wales, because I thought I want to go and see, the fruit of that revival. And so I couldn't quite understand. So I remember when I was in Cardiff, looking out from my window, I could see through the valleys, the valleys of, the various houses and all that. So I said, God, why did you bring me here? It seems like revival is taking place in Africa, but not here. God, I just want to go back. Then the Lord said, I'm calling you to be a missionary here in the UK. So that's really how the initial call came about. So as I was still, because obviously this was a 6-month experience, so my time came to an end. Just before that time came to an end, because I'd resigned from my job back home, so my manager rang me up in Wales and said, well, Tendai, how are things going? So I said, things are going well. I mean, he was a Chinese manager, and so he was quite a pleasant guy, but he was not a Christian, but he knew about my faith. And so, so what are your plans? So, my time has come to an end. So what are your plans? And so I'm planning to come back home. By this time, I'd applied to go to the Baptist College, South Wales Baptist College, because the intention in my head was go back home, get married to my girlfriend, and then come back together so I can go to Bible college, so he said, well, your job is still here. We have not been able to replace you. So when you do come, please come back to work. So I flew back, and then the following day I was back at work. So that was just God's providence, how God just provided and enabled me to walk back into a job. So I remember sharing with Prudence, well, God is calling us to Wales. God is calling us to the UK. So we need to. So when we get married, we're going to be heading off. So our marriage was supposed to be happening in September that year. Then a response was, I heard it's very cold there. I don't want to go to Wales. I don't want to go to UK. I'm told it's very cold there. And then I said, well, yeah, it is very cold, but they've got heating systems. Said, no, I don't want to go. No. So I said, well, Lord, she doesn't want to go, so I'm not going to go. So I began to use Prudence as an excuse. So although that picture of those young people was still very much vivid in my mind, I became so trapped by money, the love of money. I was involved in church activities. I was leading worship, and I was part of the mission group. And so often we'll travel to Mozambique. Our church used to send different teams around the different parts of Southern Africa. But I became so caught up in what I was doing that I kind of like strayed in terms of being radical for Jesus. But at the same time, I was still a faithful goer to, I was still participating in the life of the church and all that, but I was not fully 100% as I had been prior, because, money was much more attractive to me, nice cars, having a nice place to live and all that, having gardeners and maids, so it was a very cushy lifestyle, but then God kept on saying through this other minister who had been my youth pastor, he said, Tendai, why are you still at work? God has called you to ministry. Why are you still at work? And it got to a point whereby I would avoid this minister. Each time I would see him coming coming my way, I would literally cross over or change my direction completely. So because it felt as if each time he opened his mouth, it seems as if at the time that those were the only words that came out of his mouth. I mean, today I laugh about it and I ask him, he said, well, he doesn't remember. But anyway, to me, it was as clear as that, tonight, why are you still at work? God has called you, leave what you're doing and go serve the Lord. And so I just thought, wow, maybe not now. Prudence is not ready. It's this woman that the Lord has given me, but she's not ready. And so I began to use her as an excuse. So I remember one year we were, I was part of a mission team. We went to Mozambique. And so this pastor was with me, so we went together with a couple of other young people, so while we were in Mozambique, we're driving back, and so he was dozing as he was driving. So I said, well, let me drive, let me take over, because it was quite hot, extremely hot. You had to keep all the windows shut, air conditioning not working, so you're struggling to keep awake while you're driving, so I remember, so everybody, so I'm driving, the young person was supposed to be keeping me awake. He also slept. So everybody is fast asleep in the car. And before you know it, I dozed off while I was on the wheel. And so the next thing I remember was the car was heading off into the forest. So I tried to control the car, but at this time I'm thinking there's the bridge ahead of us. I have to control this car before I get off that bridge. So as soon as I thought I was bringing the car back onto the road, I hit one of these concrete culverts on the side of the bridge, missed the bridge, and the vehicle with the trailer flew over the river and landed on the other side of the bank. Uh, all I remember is the vehicle taking off. The next thing I remember is me standing outside, looking at the vehicle and everybody else trapped inside. And the way I was sitting literally squashed. So I began to ask, is everybody okay? Everybody okay? And then I helped everybody out of the vehicle. And so I began to walk to and look for help. And then the Lord said to me, Tendai, how long will you put this off for? I knew what God was talking about. I'd been in rebelliousness for almost 10 years of running away from that call. And so I helped the pastor. He had a broken femur. Another guy had an injury on his back. But I walked out of that accident with not a scratch. And so I felt as if this was the final straw where God was saying, you either respond now or don't ever. So
Okay.
I mean, that's my own interpretation, by the way. Don't, this is not God speaking audibly to me that way, but that's how I interpreted, or what I felt God was saying to me. And so we eventually got the injured folk out of the hospital. So when my pastor had a broken femur, I remember I'd hold him down while this Russian doctor was nailing pins into his femur with no anesthetic. And to this day, I can hear him screaming as I'm holding him down. It felt like it was very barbaric, but if that doctor had not done what he did, he would have lost his leg. So when we were back, he was in hospital. We were airlifted back to Zimbabwe. And while he was in hospital, his wife, she was really angry with me. And I just didn't know where to put my head. But while we were still in Mozambique, I remember ringing Prudence and saying, well, Prudence, I think it's time for us to go. Then she said, well, let's talk about it when we get home. I said, well, I think it's time for us to go. So a few months followed, and then that pastor, he was walking with a limp. He hadn't fully recovered, but still walking with a limp. Then I said to him, Pastor, I know I've been rebelling against God. I've been running away from Him. What I just want to go and serve the Lord. Can you help me? What do I need to do? Where do we go from here? Then he says, well, why don't you go to Bible college? And while you're in Bible college, God will make it clear to you. That could be a starting point. So at that point, we began to look. By this time, I was running my own business as a software consultant, and I had staff that were working for me. And the funny thing is that there was just about maybe 2 miles away, there was a Bible college just 2 miles down the road from my offices. So I felt, well, this could actually work. But then I knew that that I would never really commit to be so close to your work environment by the same time being Bible college. But I kind of felt that we just need to be completely divorced from what was familiar. So I gave away my business to the staff. I just felt I just needed to walk away, and found a Bible college in Cape Town. And so as we were preparing to go, I remember saying this to Prudence, my wife, and said, well, we've got enough savings. Our kids will continue to go to private school. We can live in a nice area in Cape Town. We can continue the life. But I kept on saying, well, I'm going to change my foreign currency tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I kept on procrastinating on it. But the day that I decided that I'm definitely doing it tomorrow, that night, the Zimbabwean economy collapsed. And all those savings that I had were worthless. I couldn't use it. I couldn't get much out of that for foreign currency. But I remember the Lord, the Lord has got ways of whispering into me. And he says, I felt as if God was saying to me, Tendai, do you dare to trust me? I said, well, Lord, only you know. I've come to this point and I've seen you being faithful. So we moved into Cape Town and started Bible college. And while we were there, I can talk one experience after another about how God met our every need. Yes, we were there were moments where we struggled to even have bread on the table for the kids, but sometimes the principal would walk into and say, "Tendai, can you come into my office?" There was a 90-year-old white man who gave me this envelope and said, "I must give it to you." And as I opened that envelope, it was the exact amount of money that we needed. There were cases whereby a couple would say, "Well, while you're here, I will fill up your fuel," and so we had fuel to commute. There was another couple that said, "Well, God has been speaking to us about your daughter, Naomi." Because it had reached a point whereby Naomi just hated school. When you got a kid who's just going to private school, and now we're in another country, she's going to a government school, she just struggled with it. She just didn't fit in. And so they said, God has put on our hearts. We just been thinking about your daughter. We don't know why, but is it okay if we pay for her fees if she goes to a private school? So she ended up in private school. Then I had another couple. I said, "Well, Tendai, can we talk to you?" I said, "You don't know who we are, but we know you because obviously I used to lead worship in the church, so I was always on the platform. So we know who you are, but you don't know who we are. Is it okay if we pay for your daughter, for your other daughter's school fees? Find any school that she wants to go to. We will pay for as long as she is here." So all our kids ended up in private school. Then finally, this is the, I guess even to this point, I well up when I think about it. We had this business person who used to come and talk to us about administration. He used to lecture us about administration. And after his lecture, he says, "Tendai, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah." So he spoke to me and said, "Well, you've been living here on campus and you're commuting to church, which is a while away. Why don't you, we've got property in Pinelands where the church is located. Why don't you live there? Come and live there with your family." I looked at this man and I just laughed. I said, "Well, there's just no way," because this was an expensive area. I said to him, "There's just no way we can afford to live there, sir. I'm sorry." He said, "Well, you misunderstood me. Come and get the keys, go and have a look at it, then come back to me." So went to look at it. I mean, it was a fantastic 3-bedroom apartment, and obviously in Cape Town, everything is gated community, alarm systems and all that. So it had everything. Then I went back to him and said, "Well, sorry, sir, we can't afford it." He says, "No, you misunderstood me. It's yours to live in as long as you are here, completely free." I just broke down and I just remembered David's word where David was saying, "I was young, now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging for bread." The interesting thing here is that when we were in Cape Town, we felt embraced by this white church. This was a predominantly white church. We tried to engage with the black churches, but the black churches did not value foreigners. They would often say, "You foreigners are taking our jobs." So when you hear the conversation about Brexit here, for me, it's nothing new because I've heard that conversation in South Africa. "You foreigners, you've come, you've taken away our jobs." But we felt welcomed in this church, and I just thought, "Lord, you have a sense of humor. The very people that I hated, you are using those very people to take care of us." It reminds me of Elijah, how, God uses his own creation to care for him. And so while I was at Bible college, I began to pray for UK. I began, the picture of those young people in classroom kept on, they kept on just, I guess they were just constantly sitting on my mind. Often I would wonder, if those kids ever surrendered their life to Jesus. So I approached the principal of the college and said, "Well, I know that we have to do our placement, but can I request to do my placement in Wales?" They says, "Well, because we know about your experience there and you've shared about how you feel God is calling you to UK, we'll make an exception for you." But by this time I had lost all contact because some people were disappointed, some felt, disappointed by the fact that I had made all this commitment to come back and go to Bible college and I had not bothered to come back. and I had not given them, so I just lost all that contact. So at this point, I'm having to start from scratch. I said, well, so I began to think, well, where do I look? So I thought, well, I'll just go to the Baptist Union website, and then I just look at some churches on there, and said, God, you direct me to the right church. So I wrote to about 3 churches in Cardiff, and so I shared my story with them. I just said to them, I feel God is calling us to the UK. And this is the experience that I've had in the past. So I'm looking for an opportunity to come and serve and do my placement with your church. There is no financial commitment for the church. All I'm looking for is for the opportunity. So 2 churches responded and said, well, we want to hear more. So I shared more. And then eventually there was a church in Penarth that, they just felt that God was in this, So they invited me to come. So I came and did my placement with a church in Penarth, Tabernacle Baptist Church. And there I was mentored by a great minister, John James. He was amazing. And so I had a fantastic time in that church, and really learned a lot, and I guess it was at that point where our paths crossed, Pete.
Yeah.
Maybe I can leave there for
let
now.
me stop you a bit in the story, and let me just sort of add a little bit of context in for folks here in terms of how our paths sort of crossed and how we came. One of the things I remember you telling me the story of that first initial trip to the UK. And I can remember you saying that the family that you initially stayed with when you came, who took you into their home, but took you into their home in a very reflective way, I think, of perhaps how some people's attitude is. They welcomed you into their home in the sense that you could be in the house, but only when they were in the house. Yeah. So when they went out in the morning, you had to go out in the morning, whether you needed to go out in the morning or not. You could only come back when they were back in the house. Yeah. I thought it was a really sad in one sense, but a telltale sense of people only willing to go so far. Yeah. In hearts and attitude. And yet he still came back. You came back to that time in Tabernacle, and our paths crossed because at that point I was in the pastorate in Pantagoida in Swansea, and we were looking for another pastor to come in and work with us, and we were going through the usual process of that, and we had a meeting that was in the church. It was an association meeting that was in the church that you came to from Cardiff, and although it was in my church, I wasn't there. I got a funny feeling I might well have been down with the rugby boys training that night and decided that I was doing a more profitable thing down there and doing mission than I would have been in association meeting. But anyway, I wasn't in the meeting, but somebody was, and the meeting actually didn't take its normal format because there had been an accident on the motorway that had shut the M4, and so lots of people weren't able to get there, and so it became a meeting of sharing and praying together, and you shared your story and your heart of wanting to come to Wales. And I had one of my elders who was in the meeting, and he came back to me the following day and said, I met this guy who is wanting to work in Wales, and we're looking for somebody you ought to consider him. And so I asked him who it was, and he said, oh, it's this Zimbabwean guy called Tendai. And so we got the place of you sending your sort of CV into us and come in. And I remember we agreed to meet. We agreed to meet halfway. We met in Bridgend. Yeah. Between Swansea and Cardiff, and we shared some time together there, and you told me a little bit of your story, and I explained what we were doing as church together. And I think I walked away from that meeting thinking, God, you've got to put this together because I want this guy to come and work with us. But it was really complicated because obviously you were in South Africa and we had to work out whether we could legally bring you into the country, and there was all these sort of issues to going on at that point and stuff. So we worked on that. But there were a couple of things that did strike me around that. I can remember sharing at the first church meeting of our interest in you. And I can remember standing up, and as you know, I'm not really good with names. I'm not good with anybody's name. I can remember standing up and not being able to pronounce your surname. And I can remember somebody saying to me in the church meeting, if you can have this guy as the pastor, you at least got to get his name right. And I can remember sort of like feeling, well, it was a difficult name. And then it occurred to me, thinking about that, I don't know why that story came to me when we were setting this up, but I was thinking, I don't have any problem with saying Llangfiangel Arath, which is a village in the middle of West Wales, but I struggled with Mbaserah, which was a bit of more of a mouthful for me, or so I thought. And I thought, no, actually, that person was right. It was just part of a thing where we needed to understand that and come to that together. But we came to a place where we invited you to come and be part of the church in Swansea and to work with us. And I can remember you were coming over at Christmas time. And I remember you leaving South Africa and it being something like 35 degrees and arriving in Wales, and it was chucking it down with rain and freezing cold. And Prudence did experience the fact that it was cold in Wales. But tell us a little bit about, not so much perhaps about that time, because we could swap stories forever, but tell us what it was like coming into that scenario. Actually, no, it wasn't a mission trip and it wasn't a placement from college. You were bringing all of your family and you were going to move into Swansea and come in to the UK to live and to minister, to serve God here. And what was your experience of that, and how did you find that as a family and that experience?
I think for me personally, because God had put so many, I guess there were so many indicators along the path where I'd seen God working things out. If I can just go back to the meeting that was supposed to happen, it ended up being an experience to just share about, sharing and praying together, where the elder of the church came and approached me. One of the things that I said, Lord, I will not send this CV to this church until someone else who is not connected to this church approaches me and tells me to send the CV. So for me, that was like my, I guess, a way of my fleece, if I may use that term. And I remember I was preaching in a church in Brixton. So while I'm in that church, I think it was after the service, I received a call from the regional minister in South Wales. Then he says to me, Tendai, apparently you spoke to this elder and they asked for your CV. Why haven't you sent your CV? Will you send your CV, please? So for me, that was God really just confirming things. So when I came to spend that weekend with you and I met you, I just felt a deeper connection there. So I was very much eager and excited to come to this new chapter, and just to see what God was going to do next. But these things sometimes when we are responding to God, our loved ones are just dragged along. Our kids didn't want to come. Even our eldest daughter, she resisted coming. They said, well, you can't be in Cape Town forever, but we've got to move on because my time has come to an end. So it was hard for the kids, while it may have been much more easier for Prudence and I, but it was very difficult for them, because for kids, when you strip them away from their friends, it feels as if for them that their world is coming apart. So but the church just went out of their way. I mean, you and Wendy, you went out of your way to make that much easier for us as a family, particularly for the kids. Where again you made them much more than welcome, and so it made their settling a little bit easier. And I guess being in a new church, I remember when we settled into our home, and I think it was Christmas Day, when a bunch of people came over to the house, and they knocked on the door. Then they started singing carols, and it was freezing cold. And I remember afterwards, people say, "Well, they're standing outside and it's freezing cold. I'm feeling cold. I'm already in the house. How do they do it?" Then I said, "Well, they are British people. They're used to this. This is the norm for them." No, but just that experience alone of a group of people, they're singing carols for us. It just spoke volume for us. And think, how can a church love so deeply to the point where they're willing to freeze in the cold and sing carols? It reiterated and confirmed God's call for us to Swansea, God's call to Wales, to the UK. So we felt at that present time that we're in the right place. We felt we were where God wanted us to be. I guess leaving Wales when we're moving over to Scotland, it felt like we're moving away from home. And when we left Wales coming here, we felt we were being sent by the Welsh community as their missionaries to Scotland. And even to this point, those relationships have blossomed. And we feel the encouragement, texts that come through, little snippets of cards that come through just to encourage, just to bless us. So we really felt at home being in Swansea, and felt really loved there. And I just loved being part and parcel of the team with you as the lead pastor there, Pete. And yes, we had some great times, we had some terrible times, we had all kinds of experiences, playing football together, being laughed at, and it was just fun, full of blessing. At the same time, there were moments of sadness. Like the book of Ecclesiastes talks about different seasons in life, and having to experience all that. Even when we went through our own losses back home, how the church was there to support us, providing funding to enable travel to Zimbabwe. That was a real tremendous, and I just thought, wow, this is what church is meant to be about, So the issue of, I guess, when you're coming in into a church community as a minister, I guess maybe your welcome is very different from someone else who's coming from another country as an ordinary person into a church. I don't know if the welcomes are exactly the same, but I can only talk about my own experience that while I was in the church, I never really felt as if I was an outsider. I've always felt like I was part and parcel of the family of God there. So it was great.
It was a good time. We had good times. We did have some tough times as well.
Yeah,
but it was great sharing ministry with you and the family as well. And a couple of quick stories that I remember that illustrate something that we're going to go on to talk to about now, about where we are in terms of society at the moment, and what your situation is now in Glasgow. I can remember before you came, when we'd voted that you were going to come, but you were still in South Africa finishing your course and getting ready to come. I can remember a Nigerian lady in the church who had a key role in the Swansea African Centre, standing up in the church meeting and saying, you don't realise what this means to me being able to go back to my community and being able to say that we've appointed a black pastor to my church, and what it meant to her. And I don't think I did realize then the significance for her, because it was only later that she shared some of the racism that she'd experienced working in South Wales Police, and some of the things that had happened to her. And I didn't quite realize perhaps the significance of that, because I just saw you as the answer to our prayers, and somebody was going to come in and serve with me, and it was going to be great, and we were going to have a good time together. But I think there were cultural things, obviously, that were different. You were coming into Wales and the Welsh culture, and trying to work through in those things. I can remember you talking about going to buy a car, and I remember you saying to me that you'd seen a black BMW with blacked out windows that you quite liked the look of, and I can remember saying to you, please don't buy that, because most of the drug dealers up on the estates in Swansea were driving black BMWs with blacked out windows, and I didn't think that was going to get you very far with the local police. And then I can remember you came home with a little white Mercedes, which made me really laugh. But, it was a time where we learned a lot. I think I learned a lot. I learned a lot about seeing things from a different perspective, and we often used to talk about that of minister in Wales, but seeing this God of all the nations. And the eyes of God, and you seeing things in a different way. I can remember that conversations about, where you would be very much somebody who was there for the moment, and for the thing that happened, and the person you happened to perhaps bump into that God had brought across your path, and that was the thing that was significant. And whereas perhaps I was very much, well, this is happening at 11:30 and this needs to happen by 12:30, and very much sort of by the clock, as perhaps British society tends to be and stuff. And they were good lessons and good things to learn together. And we were sad, but we knew God was calling you on, and he took you to Kilmarnock first, a ministry there, and then a real radical change where you've stepped out of full-time ministry and gone into supporting yourself to try and plant a church in one of the estates in Glasgow. And you've been there and doing that for some while now, and trying to work out what God is doing through that. And we've obviously kept in touch since you've been in Scotland, and followed the journey and stuff together. But let me ask you, as we're wrapping up, because I'm conscious of time for folks this morning, but we're in this point where racism is a focal conversation in society at the moment. Black Lives Matters is still very much at the forefront of what people are talking about. We've got a meeting here in Salisbury next week. One of the churches is hosting, talking about that issue. And we've been talking and discussing it in church as well. Some of our house groups have picked up on it as well. But for you, let me ask you, what's your take, your thinking about where we are at the moment in society, and what needs to be done now?
I think for me, it's just a reminder of the years that have gone, that I grew up in, or the period, the phase that I grew up in. So it's almost like that old experience is being brought back to the forefront again. And I guess, it's always been there. I think the only difference is that, in Africa, we used to have a say, if you're white, you're right, but if you're black, step back. So, it was almost like a way of simply saying that, you need to know that there is a pecking order, and and I guess for me, one of the biggest challenge, I guess, is that I feel that when a society is involved in any form of segregation, any form of prejudice, the church needs to model the needs to be an example rather of how we deal with people. The need for us to value people in spite of their skin color, in spite of whether or not they are women or whether or not they are of a particular ethnic group. We just need to value people as people. I often say to people that, when we talk about this whole thing, but your race is different. So I say, well, as far as I'm concerned, there is only one race, and that race is called humanity. And the fact that I'm black and you're white is just a pigmentation. And but if we're to cut ourselves and actually look at the blood, if we need to have a blood transfusion, we are all one people. So I think in UK there is more of people won't tell you to your face, but sometimes it's what is said, where there are questions that are raised. And I had a lady say, "Well, so you've come here so that you can claim benefits." I said, I beg your pardon? "Oh, so you're here, how many children have you got?" So I said, "Well, I got 3. "So you've come here to come and benefit from our assistance." I said, "Well, I don't know where you're getting information from, but there is this perceived idea that says if you come from another country, you are here to siphon from the system." And a lot is said because people are ignorant, they don't really understand. And sometimes people say things because they fear, because instead of me being afraid of you, Pete, or instead of me, I guess for me to have a better understanding of your Pete is to have a conversation. As we spend time to each other, it's about tolerance, it's about understanding where you're coming from. It's about your also desire to learn about me and seeking to know about where I come from, seeking to also know about my story, my own experiences. So we are exchanging information here, and as we are doing so, it's not just simply to extend information for the sake of exchanging information, but rather we are doing that so that I can get to know you. I remember some of these things being an issue in Swans, where I would ask questions and someone would say, "Well, Pastor, that's a very personal question." And I'm thinking, I guess, this way culture comes into the question here. And I'm thinking, yes, I am asking you. It's meant to be personal. So why you're asking me for something that's very personal, So what they're basically saying that that area falls into this particular category, and it's for a particular group of people, my inner circle. You don't fit into that inner circle, so therefore we can't talk about that. And I come from a culture that says, individualism is frowned upon in the culture that I come from, but it's more about community. So when I'm thinking about community, even if I'm thinking about enhancing myself, the question is always about, how does that benefit the community? So there is always a bigger picture, and that is the picture of the community. So I think the church needs to be a place whereby we can model justice, we can model the value of all people, irrespective of a person's color. We can see ourselves as equal players, see ourselves as equal citizens. We don't have to make a judgment of someone. But if I don't know something about somebody, then the ideal scenario will be to ask them, to ask them to shed more light on an issue, whatever that issue might be. So I think when we've got things like the Black Lives Matter, that has been, so like that has been, flooding over the nations as a result of the killing of Floyd. I think, the church somehow or the other has been fast asleep. The church has been sort of like burying its head in the sand and hoping that these things will go away. You know, I remember when my kids were saying, well, Dad, can we go to the Black Lives Matter? You know, I said, well, of course you can. You know, if you feel, you know, you need to speak out, you need to be the voice for the voiceless, then it's a fantastic thing to do. You know, so we see more and more of our young people saying that this is unacceptable. But, you know, one of the things that I ask our Baptist community, our Baptist wider family is, what are we saying? You know, if we are silent about an issue like this, you know, what are we saying about the issue of race? What are we saying about the issue of equality? What are we saying about about the issues of gender? You know, what are we saying about, you know, workplaces, you know, equal pay for whether you're a man or a woman? What are we saying about, you know, because I feel so often the church will be speaking out and being prophetic to the nation, but so often the church, for the sake of peace, seeks to keep quiet on these matters. Yet the God that we serve is a God who values and honors and calls out and cries out for justice. You know, so we see a God who calls us to be His voice in a society that is fragmented, in an environment that is divisive. You know, sometimes when we hear unhelpful comments from our politicians, the church should be stepping forward and say, well, that's unacceptable. I think of John the Baptist, you know, where he sees, you know, a king who behaves and takes over someone else's wife. What does he do? He doesn't simply say, well, I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be perceived as being judgmental here. He challenges him to his face and he says, well, that's unacceptable. But what does it cost him? It cost him his life. You know, so when we stand up and we stand up for what God stands up for, yes, it will make us and puts us in a place whereby we will become persecuted. I often say that, you know, persecution will start in this country when Christians begin to stand up for what is right, when Christians begin to stand and speak out the word of God. But as long as we compromise, as long as we keep silence on some of these subject matters, you know, there will never be persecution. You know, so I think it's high time that the church needs to begin to have an honest conversation about, you know, about this subject matter, rather than pretending that it's not there, because it is there. You know, these things are real. I know Pete and you and I, we've talked about this even when I was in Swansea, about my own struggles on the issue of the remembrance service, because for me, it brings up unpleasant emotions for me, because I kind of feel that there's, you know, that the church is being asked to pause and reflect on the victories of Britain, on the successes of Britain. And at that moment, I'm not sure exactly what I'm being asked to do as an African, as someone who was prejudiced, as someone who had ancestors that were forced to fight for the empire, as someone who feels that, you know, you know, when my own ancestors were killed and there was looting in Africa, you know, because let me share an experience that happened in Cape Town, you know, in this church that we were worshiping. You know, it was Remembrance Sunday. I mean, because I'd never seen it before until I was in Cape Town, because, you know, in Zimbabwe, you know, it was something that was never done by the church. The only time that you saw something similar to that, it involves the Anglican Church because of its close connection with the state. You know, but as far as Baptists and other denominations, you know, we just didn't participate in those sort of things. You know, but I remember in this church, they were, you know, they said, let's pause. And then they went on to then talk about the Germans, what the Germans did and all that. And I just felt uncomfortable with where that service was going. And there was a German family who were members of that church. They walked out. They felt hurt. And I managed to have a conversation with them later, and they said, well, we are resigning our membership from this church, and they left. They said, we feel hurt. So I feel that, yes, this may be part and parcel of the British church tradition, but I often wonder whether or not the church has taken time to look and say, we are conducting these things. If someone was coming from another country or another, um, what's the right word? Another experience, and they are coming into this experience, do they understand what this is all about? I know that we've sought to contextualize and talk, nowadays we talk about all wars, but because when I read scripture, the only thing that I'm told to remember is what Christ has done. So when the church is then participating in something else other than that, it makes me uncomfortable. And so these are the things that I've shared and with the churches, in Pantaguaira. I think you, Pete, and the leadership, you excused me, so I've never participated in those things. So when I went to Kilmarnock, we had this conversation again, and I said that because it makes me feel uncomfortable, it doesn't sit well with me. Because it brings up all these other things that are not helpful for my own well-being, so I was excused. But then, is it just acceptable for me to be excused from being part of the family while the family is having that bit, and then I'm left out? Is this what church is meant to be about? So here in Scotland, as with other fellow ministers, we are looking at this whole thing about equality, about whether or not my white colleagues here in Scotland see me as an equal player. We are discussing these sort of things. So I think the starting point is dialogue. It's not about Tendai getting upset and then walking off, but it's actually about having a conversation. And when we talk about that, we want to welcome other people from other communities. We got to move away from the language of them and us, but we got to have a language that encompasses every fabric, every ethnic group, because after all, we are one people, because Paul says that there is neither Jew or Gentile, but we're one in Christ, so if we are one in Christ, what is it that separates us? And if those things are separating us, then we as a church need to address those things and then pave a way forward. And I think before we can begin to point a finger at what's happening outside the church, out with the church, we need to look at what's happening within the church. I remember in Cape Town, although it's a predominantly white church, and in Sunday we're greeting one another, the atmosphere is fantastic. And then when you're out with that environment, maybe during the week, you see someone that you worship with and they ignore you. And then you think, oh, hold on, this doesn't make any sense. How come when we are outside the church and now we are, whether by the shopping area or whether we're in schools, our paths are crossing, but there's an element whereby you feel ignored. You greet someone, but you don't mention their name, hello, and they look away. I think, hold on a minute, but I was just worshiping with this person in church. So those are the sort of things that when I talk about silent treatment, ignoring one another, where in church we do one thing, but what is it that we do in private? Because those are the things that matter the most, the stuff that we do in private. I think for me, this whole thing about racism, it's still very, I thought I'd moved on, from the days of, Zimbabwe and our experiences there. Yeah, yes, God has had to deal with my carnal nature, with my brokenness, but this issue of remembrance, somehow or the other, it almost like it's like I'm digging at that same wound, and it's sore and it's painful, and I kind of feel that wanting to talk about it or raising it might make people feel uncomfortable, uneasy, upset. I mean, the agenda really is not to try and offend anybody. We are not by in any way seeking to offend anybody, but we just simply saying some of our practices and some of our traditions, we've got to begin to ask our question, is this building up the Church of Christ, or are we using these things to separate the body? I mean, outside the church, yes, I've had various experiences of being stopped by the police. I'm flying from Glasgow, flying to London. I'm the only one out of all the customers that are traveling through at the airport. I'm the only one who's pulled aside. I'm asked, why are you here? So you're constantly having to explain yourself. So when I hear about institutional racism, I nod my head and said, yes, I see it. But my issue for me is that I don't have a problem with secular doing that. I have a problem when I see that in the life of the church. The people that should know better, that's where I have a problem. I don't have a problem when a police officer stops me and searches me. I don't have a problem with that because yes, that's how they behave. So that's fine. But I have a problem when my own brother or sister ignores me at a shopping center when I say hello, or they look the other way. And then when you ask them in church, they say, I didn't see you. Or, so you think, well, okay, am I making this up? Or, but there is a continual pattern. And sometimes these are the sort of things that you hear from other ethnic minorities that worship in white churches. And sadly, it's led to a situation where you are ending up with African churches, Caribbean churches being established. And I've resisted and I've challenged some of my African brothers and said, but this is not right. We can't just go set up our own church that are similar to the way we used to do things back home, the way we worship in our own language. I said, but then their response is always about, but we don't feel welcome. At least when we do our own thing, I feel I can engage in that. I can give my soul into that. I know that I'm welcomed here. So that's why we're seeing a mushrooming of ethnic churches, whether it's Indian church or Chinese church. For goodness sake, there is only one church. I think if we're living within the context of the UK, there shouldn't be such a thing as an African church or Chinese church. There should just be one church. We should be worshiping in the same church, because the picture that I would like to see is a church of every fiber, every color, gathering in one place and worshiping Jesus, because that would just be simply a flawed picture of what heaven is going to be like. When the Lord gathers us from all the corners of the world and we begin to worship Jesus together, irrespective of our ethnicity.
Well, we're gonna, I trust, reflect at least a little of that, because we're gonna share communion together in a few moments. But Tendai, it's been great to chat. Thanks for the challenge. Thanks for the journey that we've had, and God willing, we'll continue to have together in knowing what God is doing. We want to pray and bless you in what you're seeking to do with God in Glasgow as well. And if folks here in Salisbury want to find out a little bit more about that, I can put them in touch with you about
Thank you very much for having me,
what you're doing. So we're going to sing together, and then we're going to share communion together. So Tendai, bless you, and thank you for all of that, and let that conversation, that dialogue continue. God bless you in that. Amen.